Hi, this is Scott Garibay, and today we're going to talk about Dungeons and Dragons, and we're going to talk about a concept that I'm very interested in, DND, Identity D&D, and what we're specifically going to talk about is your path to what I believe, right? And a path that might be acceptable to more people. All right, so let's get into this. So I have this incredibly rare view of Dungeons and Dragons, right? And I believe that in 1974, Gary Gygax released Dungeons and Dragons as disguised as a game, but fully understanding and fully intending it and having built it as the most powerful secular engine for human improvement that had ever been created. And that Dungeons and Dragons fundamentally really had nothing to do with gaming, and I mean zero to do with gaming, and had to do with facilitating human exploration of these key human experiences: identity, narrative, and language, right? And if you believe this, if you believe that Dungeons and Dragons is a fundamentally key bridge, is a massively key bridge to identity, narrative, and language, then at that point you begin, like, you arrive where I arrive, where I have no longer have any apologies, any excuses, or any shame attached to the idea that Dungeons and Dragons is an anchor element of my identity. It is part of who I am. It's part of, it's never going, D&D, I'll be with D&D until they put me in a pine box, right? I started when I was 12. I'll quit when I die. And I won't even quit when I die. There'll never be a quit, right? I'll die before I abandon, before I'm not buying the next D&D canon hardback. It's just this. I'm all in, right? And that's what I'm saying too. I'm saying to you, Dungeons and Dragons is worth massive investments of your time, energy, and focus, right? Huge portions of your life, and I'm saying it like right now, like this is the thing to go all in on, right? Like the secular thing to go all in on. I am an evangelical Christian. I think that sacred things are more valuable, but this is the most valuable secular thing that's ever been created. I'm convinced of that, right? Now, I present this to people and they go, I love your idea, right? But I don't think you're right. I don't think Gary did what you said he did, right? I think he just presented it as a game. And now, people interact with it in the way they want, right? Well, this is interesting. So, a person I care about gave me a fantastic book that I cannot recommend highly enough to you. And it's called Legends and Lattes. And it came out within the last couple years, and it has been on a lot. It's really taking over BookTube and Book Talk. Book Talk. Right, and so it's very powerful. It's a fantastic book, and what it is it's the number one book for cozy fantasy. Now, what the heck is that, right? Well, it has this story about a half-orc adventurer who reaches about, and actually the book is not official D&D, but it is written so that everything in it, there's no question in my mind, the author, Travis Baldree, is a longtime D&D player, because everything in it, it's all the same weapons, all the same type of magic, and adventures are structured the same in it. And so the star of the book is Viv, a half-orc fighter, and she's 15th level, and the book starts when she has finished her last adventure. And so she has hundreds of gold pieces, right? And that's going to allow her to retire and start a coffee house in a fantasy city. So she gets a dowsing rod and she goes into the city. She uses the dowsing rod. She finds a building that is right over a magical source of pure, clear, magically infused water, right? And she's going to use this to make her awesome coffee and open up a coffee house. And this entire book is about a retiring adventurer who opens a coffee house in a fantasy city. And it's a beautiful book, and it really is, it's a transformative story. It's delightfully entertaining, but there's a lot of lessons in it, and we're going to talk about one of the lessons today. So when she finds she finds the building that she's going to put her coffee house in, it's a livery, right? It's where horses, it has a high ceiling, right? And it's a building between other buildings. but it's where a livery was, where they actually kept horses in the city, right? So it's a gigantic building with lots of space, but it was a livery. Horses were kept there, right? So Viv finds this place, and she goes and she offers 8 platinum pieces, which is 80 gold pieces, to buy this incredible building from a drunkard. The person who owns it is a complete drunkard, and we don't really know the story yet about, you know, why he's a drunkard and like spends every day drinking. But she essentially just gives him months or even years of drinking money, and then gets the building, right? And so she he's like, and the owner, you know, before he sells it to her, says, why do you, what are you going to do with the building? And she's like, I'm going to create a coffee house. And he's like, what? This is where we kept horses, right? It's not a good place to make a coffee house. And this is the part this is why we're talking today. Viv says back one of the best lines I've ever read in any novel. And she says, I'm actually going to read it. Hold on. She says, things don't have to stay as what they started as. That is brilliant and beautiful. And I'm just like, things don't have to stay as what they started as. So if you can't sign on that Gary Gygax built Dungeons & Dragons as the most powerful secular human improvement tool, specifically designed for dungeon masters to improve themselves and improve every player at their table, and by extension for those players to go out and improve everybody around them, right? If you can't sign on to that, can you sign on to that being what it has become? That people saw what Gary did and his incredible progressiveness, right? From in 1974 saying your identity is unbound. You're no longer bound to your actual gender. You're no longer bound to your actual preference. You're no longer bound to your actual species. You can make social experiments out of all of this. You are freed from the restrictions of your own identity. And then doing that in 1974 and having questions and answering questions in 1974 that we are still debating today, right? On, what are we allowed to do with our identities? How are we allowed to change them? We're still massively debating that today, right? And Gary Gygax was giving answers to freedom and liberty and progressiveness in 1974. In 1983, he came and he said, oh, hey, this Dungeons & Dragons thing, it's for young people. It's for people of color. It's for both genders. And his progressiveness was huge, just unmatched, right? And so can you sign on to the idea that people saw this incredibly progressive, beautiful, free energy that he gave out in 1974 and have been inspired by it to the point where today people are actually that people like Amanda Heyman, people like Robert Hainsou, people like Tim Cook, people like Ryan Dancy, people like Lorraine Williams have moved Dungeons & Dragons to the point where it really no longer functions as a game, but actually functions as a secular human improvement tool, right? And so I don't believe that's the truth of it, right? I believe that we're here because Gary designed it that way. But you might not need to believe that to get on board with what I'm saying and to actually start using Dungeons & Dragons as a tool. And the reason why is exactly what Viv said. Things don't have to stay as what they started as. So I'm proposing to you, what if you believe that it was a game in the beginning, which is wrong, but it might be a stepping stone that you need. It might be a step ladder that you need, right? To get to the point to realize, if you think it started as a game, can you really look at it today, seeing what it's done, and say it's still a game, right? It's functioning at a level that really no other tabletop role-playing game in the world functions as, and frankly, it's doing things that no other American elements of Americana are doing. It's truly functioning in a different way. And you don't have to listen to me for that. On D&D Direct, they had Joe Magagnola say, I'm having elevated conversations with people who have used D&D to transform their own lives and change the culture they live in, right? D&D, in my humble opinion, is flat out saying it, right? And so If you can't sign on with the first part of what I'm saying, can you sign on with the second? That you believe it is where I say it is now, even if you don't sign on to the first part, right? So that's my point is, just think for a minute. Things don't have to stay as what they started as, right? So if you think it started as a game, can you for 1 second believe it's a game now?